What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Man, did you guys really think I was going to make you guys wait a week? Did you really think I was going to make you wait a week for the end of Secret Empire? No, not at all. We're doing this Injustice style. Hopefully you guys are excited. Anyway, so this is the conclusion. This is the end of Secret Empire. Now, the cool thing about this is that Secret Empire, at least in my opinion, is one of the coolest stories about Captain America. I mean, I get that there are some people out there who are just like, no, my opinion is an absolute. I don't like it. No one should like it because I don't like it. That's fine. I mean, I think it's a really cool story. But the idea here is that with the Hydra Captain America with Secret Empire, it's not suddenly an all new, all different Marvel thing. It is to a degree, but it's actually been one cohesive story that's been going all the way back to Castaway and Dimension Z. And that's why I like it, is because it's just one great, big, huge tale of Steve Rogers as a character, which is why I say it's so cool, is because we've read a million stories where Captain America has led the Avengers into a conflict against a million enemies. We've seen that a million times before. Throwing a shield, fighting the bad guys. They become rinse and repeat stories. And so the idea with Secret Empire was to switch all that up, to stop doing the same rinse and repeat stories all the time, to give us like a darker character. What would happen if Captain America Steve Rogers became a bad guy? And so what this does, at least, with the whole Iron Nail, Castaway, and Dimension Z, that all went all the way back to the whole idea of Steve Rogers losing his super soldier serum. That's really all it was. When he lost his super soldier serum, he was basically aged up. He began to age extremely fast. And so what ended up happening is he basically handed his mantle over to Sam Wilson. Now, of course, Sam Wilson had been the sidekick for quite some time. And so it made sense that if anybody was going to be the next version of Captain America, it would be Sam Wilson, because he's fought alongside him so much longer. Because of this, when All New, All Different Marvel started, with Steve Rogers still being an older guy, what ended up happening is there was an event that was written called Avengers Standoff. And what Avengers Standoff did is it basically brought in the idea that S.H.I.E.L.D. had basically recreated or reconstructed a cosmic cube using various shards that had existed all throughout, its history and so on and so forth. And then when they reconstructed this cosmic cube, they basically created this sort of fake paradise, a more or less warped reality, to essentially take over the lives of villains, which is to say, blind them from what was really going on. It was a very Matrix-esque kind of situation. The result here was that when the Avengers learned about what was going on, it was considered a violation of human rights. And so, as we would expect, the Avengers responded. The Avengers basically took down the entirety of Pleasant Hill, the whole assault on Pleasant Hill storyline, so on and so forth. But in the midst of all this, the Red Skull had become aware of the fact that the cosmic cube had become sentient. But the idea here is that with S.H.I.E.L.D. being brought down, with Red Skull learning that the cosmic cube was sentient, Red Skull in turn used the cosmic cube to simply sit down and say, okay, fine, if I've never been able to beat Steve Rogers fighting him hand to hand, then I'll just alter his past and I'll just make him a Hydra agent using the cosmic cube. And that's exactly what happened. Now, this eventually led to a rift between Steve Rogers as a Hydra agent and Red Skull, because, Steve Rogers said Red Skull is not really Hydra. He's just pretending to be Hydra, ultimately killing the Red Skull, taking over Hydra himself, and then launching this campaign to take over the entirety of North America with his sights set on the world. Now, the other half of this is we picked up with something called the Vanishing Point, and we didn't really know what the Vanishing Point was. All we knew is that the classic Steve Rogers, which is to say the version that existed before Secret Empire, was just running around this Vanishing Point. Now, eventually we learned the Vanishing Point was just the mind of Kabik, the Cosmic Cube. It was basically this classic Steve Rogers being a memory of who he used to be. And so again, it essentially kept the concept of him alive, even if he wasn't alive in the traditional sense. Now, what this does is, with that kind of catching us up to a degree, again, you can go check out the most recent video to fully understand what's going on. With this basically boiling down to the entirety of the Earth's superheroes taking on Hydra Captain America, they all do the best they can. But keep in mind, he's captured all but one shard of the cosmic cube. So even if he doesn't necessarily have the power to warp all things in existence, he's got more than enough power to take on the various superheroes. And that's exactly what he does. He basically shows up and begins taking them all down. Now, of course, this coincides with Sam Wilson handing over his shard of the cosmic cube, basically giving up, basically saying, hey, look, here's your shard, do whatever it is that you want to do. Now, in this moment, this is where all the superheroes lose. Suddenly, Captain America uses the cosmic cube and whisks them all away. And that's par for the course. When it comes to all these cosmic stories, whether it's the original Secret Wars 2 when the Beyonder came to Earth, when it comes to the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, Infinity Crusade, Infinity Abyss, when it comes to all those stories, it's always just some being with godlike power wipes everybody from existence. So it's not new. That's routine. That always happens. It's one of the big complaints that people have when it comes to those characters, when it comes to those massive story arcs. What do you do when you're facing a foe who's virtually indestructible? Now, of course, this basically leads to this sort of recreation of Earth as Hydra Captain America wants it to be. In this instance, Dr. Doom leads the Fantastic Four instead of Reed Richards. Professor Xavier and Magneto are considered mutant revolutionaries, and they're executed by Hydra. But suddenly, all these issues that Hydra Captain America sees begin to get whisked away. They begin to go away. They begin to vanish. And so with this virtual, godlike power that's possessed by Hydra Captain America, with Sam Wilson again popping up on the scene saying, hey, look, here's my final shard, all these things taking place, what we end up finding out is that this was all basically a ruse by the superhero community, that they realized that it'd be almost impossible for them to directly stop Hydra Captain America. What they needed was someone who would basically be able to offer them a counterpoint. But what we end up finding out here is that with Bucky Barnes having previously been inside the Vanishing Point, with him knowing that the memory, quote unquote, of the classic Steve Rogers is there, what he basically does is initiate this sort of rescue mission where he literally shows up inside of the Vanishing Point and then just tries to grab Steve Rogers, classic Steve Rogers, and bring him back. Now, the other half of this is the character of Kobik herself. The cool thing about Kobik as a character is that, again, with the cosmic cube that she comes from having been so newly created, the fact that she's a little girl is designed to mimic her stage, that is to say, how old she is as far as the cosmic cube is, meaning the cosmic cube is like in its adolescence, so to speak. But with the whole character of Kobik, she's terrified of everything that's going on, because remember, she does not see herself as this all-powerful, godly entity. She sees herself as a kid who could just do some pretty crazy things. And so at the end of the day, she doesn't have the full wherewithal of her powers. More so than that, because she sees the world as someone who's just basically scared of what's going on, not fully understanding or regretting her decisions, she in turn tries to run away. Now, this is why classic Captain America is so important. And this is why people loved classic Captain America. And we'll get a little more into this, classic versus Hydra, Steve Rogers here in a minute. But with classic Steve Rogers, he was a rallying point. He was a point by which, despite the fact that you could shoot him with a gun, because that's how he died, despite the fact that you could knock him out, he was a guy that everybody implicitly trusted. He was first in, last out. Always the guy to be there to make sure that things ran like they were supposed to. The result was that people would just follow him no matter where it was that he would go or what it was that he wanted to do. And this was basically the scheme that was pulled. With this cosmic cube more or less being reinstated, it's basically Hydra Captain America using the power of Kobik because she was too afraid to use it on her own. What ends up happening is that with Bucky Barnes going into the Vanishing Point, basically into the mind of Kobik, retrieving her alongside classic Steve Rogers, she basically takes her power back and everything starts to return to normal. And that's when we get into this battle of classic Captain America versus Hydra Captain America. And that's the cool thing here. These characters are able to exist simultaneously because one's a memory and one is not. If we had to sit down and we had to say, okay, if we're basing this, on like the physical form, right? Like the physical body, which one's the real Captain America? Then it's Hydra Cap. This is the same Captain America we've been seeing for years and years and years, just with his history altered. The classic Captain America that you're seeing right now with the blue outfit and the A on his head and all that kind of stuff, he's basically a memory given physical form. And so it's essentially a resurrection of sorts. Now, of course, with this fight between the two of them, it is the quintessential battle of like freedom versus security. That's really what this is designed to represent, because the whole story was basically predicated on that. It was this story that created this kind of argument that really hailed to that phrase that's overused, those who would sacrifice freedom for security, blah, 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 blah. It's that whole argument come to bear in this story, because the nature of this is that these guys both represent two separate sides, both of which are valid. If you guys are familiar, myself, Nautical Candy, and a comic historian run a channel called Eligible Monster, where we talk about games and do all kinds of cool stuff. One of the discussions that we had recently was we ran over who was right in injustice. Was it Superman? Was it Batman? Superman basically wanted to rule the world through control, but he basically became a dictator. Batman was the guy who was fighting against him as the rebel. In this story, it's much the same way. Hydra Steve Rogers wants to rule the world with absolute control. Classic Steve Rogers says, no, people need to choose. choose. But notice this, both sides are legitimate. Say for example that you're walking down an alley and there's a little girl, and her parents have just been killed by a mugger. You don't catch the mugger runs off, the little girl's crying. Are you really gonna walk up to her and say, look, I know we probably could have prevented this from happening, but you losing your parents is the price you pay for freedom? Because the alternative is that we try to stop crime everywhere and we restrict people's rights and things like that. Are you gonna be the one to tell that little girl that? Well, of course not. But at the same time, freedom is a necessity. And that's why both these things are so important, is because there's a balancing act. You can't have one in the extreme. You can't have extreme freedom. You can't have a society where it's just, hey, do whatever you want to, and whatever happens, happens. But you also can't have a society where you say, nobody can do anything without my permission first. Because at that point, things go absolutely awry. You have to have this middle ground. People can do things, but there have to be consequences for it. Law and order has to exist. Checks and balances have to exist. People can commit crimes, but there have to be punishment for those crimes. There's imperfections all throughout the system as it exists, but you try to make it work as best you can. And ultimately, that's the argument classic Captain America has. And that's why people love him so much, is because at the end of the day, he says, look, things are screwed up, things aren't necessarily right, but in the end, the freedom that we enjoy gives us the freedom to choose. It gives us the freedom to say, what if we don't like the direction that things are going in? What if we don't like where we are right now? Then let's change it. Because if you walk up to a person and you say, change your life, and you put a gun in their face, they'll change their life until that gun goes away. And then once the gun's gone, they'll go right back to where they were before. True change has to happen organically. People have to change because it's fear of where they used to be versus where they could be that drives them to keep doing better. And that's the goal of classic Captain America. He says, look, we've made all kinds of mistakes, war, disease, famine, we've done all kinds of terrible things, but we can learn from them. We can look at where we used to be and say, why would we want to go back to that? Let's go to this. Let's look to the brighter future and let's do that instead. Hydra Captain America had a similar view. His idea was to do it at the barrel of a gun. Now, at the end of the day, it also raises the question, if the ultimate goal is achieved, then of what difference is there? And if these people cared about their freedom so much, then why weren't they fighting for it? And so that really brings that whole thing into play. It brings that whole question in. Well, you can't stick your head in the sand hoping things will get better and then complain when they don't. Doing things changes things. Doing nothing keeps things exactly as they are. And so because of that, in this moment, when we basically have this question of who's the correct person here, Hydra Captain America does the only thing that he can do, grabs the hammer of Thor in an attempt to lift it up and prove his worth, only to find out that he can't, that he's not worthy, because he no longer believes he is. He's no longer righteous. He's no longer the right guy here. Now, of course, this leads to classic Captain America picking up the hammer of Thor. Now, this is not the first time we've seen this, but it's always one of those cool things. And that's why people say, well, the fact that he's picked it up so often, the fact that so many people have lifted the hammer of Thor, it doesn't really even matter anymore. That's nonsense. That's absolute tomfoolery. It is the context of when the hammer's picked up that makes it matter. In 50 years, we could have stories where 1,000 people lifted the hammer of Thor, but the context in which the hammer is picked up is what makes it important, because this provides a kind of finality. It provides an answer to that question. No, classic Captain America's right. No, Hydra Captain America's wrong. That's the end of that. There's no discussion, there's no debate, none of that stuff. This is how it is. And that's what makes it so cool, is because it's almost like this sort of, mic drop, right? Just like, boom, I hit you with the hammer of Thor, mic drop. Like, it's one of those really, really cool moments. It's one of those cool things. But what ends up happening here is things wrap up relatively fast. I mean, it basically turns into a rebuilding phase. But one thing to keep in mind is that despite the fact that things have changed, one thing that classic Captain America did not have Kobik do is wipe the minds of the whole of humanity. It's important that the whole of humanity remember, they'll look at superheroes with a skewed perspective, they'll look at superheroes and they won't necessarily trust them again, but at the end of the day, they will know that the superheroes did right by them. The superheroes didn't change anything, trying to make things better again. But again, this goes into like the Omega issue, right? Like it goes into the whole Omega thing, it goes into the aftermath, because there is follow-up for all these various characters and all these things that have happened. But at the end of the day, the ending was kind of like, but the story itself, I thought was pretty stellar. I thought it was pretty solid. It was one of my more enjoyable experiences with Captain America. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, and make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.